Right on the heels of a profile published for Rachel Zegler, it sounds like Hollywood is responding to that backlash by telling stars to stay off social media. There's a very interesting piece out of Variety that seems to be responding directly to the Rachel Zegler problem. Let's talk about that on That Park Place. Hello, I am Jonas J. Campbell, an investigative reporter for That Park Place, and here with me is the guy that I go to when I want to know what in the world is wrong with Hollywood, Mr. VashSky. Vash, what's their problem?
You go to me? I don't even know what their problem is. They got all kinds of problems. But you know what, Jonas? I think this whole article that we're about to cover right here shows one particular problem that even the article itself doesn't reference. The fact that Hollywood just might be out of touch with its audience.
I think you might be right. I think that there might be, not to begin with the conclusion. We'll come to our own conclusions as we go through this video. But it seems like Hollywood might be an entirely separate culture that has nothing to do with the rest of the United States. Just maybe. But let's talk about this. Toxic fandom, how Hollywood is battling fans who are just out for blood, from social media boot camps to superfan focus groups. This one by Adam B. Various, and one of his B. Various articles. Look at that right there. We got Bridgerton, I think, right there. I don't know what the deal is with Bridgerton. Rings of Power, The Marvels, The Boys, some obscure show. Maybe it's something about monks. I don't know. And I'm going to guess that's Rings. No. Game of Thrones. On August 28th, Amanda Stenberg, the lead of Star Wars series The Acolyte. Oh, I forgot about that one. Posted an 8.5-minute video to her Instagram stories about Lucasfilm's abrupt decision to not pick up the show for a second season, just a month after the season 1 finale streamed on Disney+. It's not a huge shock for me, Stenberg said. Since the series was announced in 2020, she continued, we started experiencing a rampage of, I would say, hyper-conservative bigotry and vitriol, prejudice, hatred, and hateful language towards us. Stenberg was unavailable to comment for this story. I think I have a theory on why she was unavailable for comment on this story. Maybe the story itself can help indicate why. In other words, The Acolyte was the latest high-profile target of toxic fandom, the catch-all term for when fan criticism curdles from good faith dissatisfaction. Wow, there's an interesting term, into a relentlessly negative, often bigoted online campaign against either the project or its stars or creative leaders. In a franchise economy increasingly dependent on established audience devotion to drive the bottom line, the threat of toxic fandoms poisoning that enthusiasm has become a seemingly intractable headache for almost every studio, and it's only getting worse. Vash, I'm going to say this is already starting out with a mischaracterization.
I think it is.
I'm predisposed to like a lot of this stuff, and this is where I often like to point out that you know, I haven't revisited them for a little while because I wanted to get the taste out of my mouth, but I actually like about 50% of the Disney Star Wars spin-off trilogy there. You know, when I left the theater after Force Awakens, I was actually really hopeful for where they might be going with that. I gladly went to The Last Jedi. And when I watched The Last Jedi and after I left with good feelings about that. It wasn't until I started to think about, wow, they really degraded Luke Skywalker. And then Rise of Skywalker, which we often jokingly refer to as Rise of Palpatine, the more you think about that movie and how rushed it was and how nonsensical it was and how much it seems to kind of ignore established tropes, it's you start to see more points that just kind of bring you out of it. I think it doesn't have anything to do with the races or sexes or I don't even know the proclivities of anyone in the cast in particular here. But I get the feeling this article is trying to say that the reason you wouldn't like those things is because Daisy Ridley is a girl, or Oscar Isaac is, I don't know, Hispanic. I don't particularly care what he is. He's actually a great actor.
Yes.
Didn't really like him in the third one.
No, didn't much care for him in the third one, but was really good in the first one, and they just couldn't recapture that magic with that character post The Last Jedi. It's interesting because if you read that paragraph there, yes, toxic fandom is a catch-all term. Now they say, well, it curdles from criticism, good faith dissatisfaction to relentlessly negative, often bigoted online campaigns. It's like, well, who decides that delineating line. And that's kind of what this article, I don't know if it attempts to do that, but it does do that. It blurs the lines between those two things. And I mean, for any average person looking at this whole situation, we can pretty much determine, okay, well, that person is definitely got something going on there. But we've seen the characterizations of people with legitimate criticisms be lumped in with people that are, let's say, undesirable in the conversation as well.
Right, right, and it just to add to this, and I have a point that I want to make after we read this paragraph. Sometimes toxic fandoms behave reactively. A House of the Dragon episode featuring two female characters kissing and an episode of The Last of Us focusing on a gay couple were both review bombed. Practice of mobbing sites like Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb with negative user reviews, which gained mainstream attention following the premiere of 2017's Star Wars: The Last Jedi. An entire YouTube ecosystem is devoted to declaring projects like The Marvels, The Boys, woke garbage, among other pungent sobriquets. Actually, the funny thing is, The Marvels is not woke. It isn't, because they cut almost everything out of that film that could be considered woke. It is, I'm going to say, use another term that I don't really like to use. It's cringe. It's also an incomplete movie. But some of the things that ended up getting cut out of that film, we've seen online, jokes that are made about things I don't even want to talk about in this video in particular, and probably are not appropriate for a comic book film that is being marketed, by the way, to children. Maybe not children primarily, but Disney definitely tries to promote this stuff to children. The Last of Us, I seem to remember, and I haven't watched The Last of Us, but I hear it's a hit. There was an episode where you don't encounter the main characters and instead you stop for a gay love story. And also, The Boys, the reviews that I'm hearing of The Boys are actually in response, if I'm reading the tea leaves here, that Eric Kripke actually decided to antagonize parts of the audience that he felt like weren't getting the message of what he was saying. So The Boys became something where they were trying to preach at the audience about how bad the audience was for what he perceived as a misinterpretation of the character of Homelander. And you'll have to forgive me, when The Last of Us stops and goes to two side characters and does a gay romance, that starts to feel like maybe they're trying to get something into the audience's heads, and people don't like to be preached to. I would say that is something that, no matter what that message is, people start to cringe and here's the word, backlash against that. They do reference 2016 and Leslie Jones on that. I'm going to say the Leslie Jones situation was different. I think that was more criticism of Leslie Jones, that Sony didn't understand what they were getting into at that point. Vash, you and I were talking before this, and give an example of a situation they'd probably talk about in this Variety article here. Let's talk about Moses Ingram for just a moment. Moses Ingram is an actress that was in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. And in the show, she plays a Sith Inquisitor. She's actually referred to as one of the sisters in that. I don't think that was a characterization that was before she was cast in the role, but most of the Sith Inquisitors that we've seen are pale, very pale skin. In fact, like a deathly pale skin. They're all evil, and most of them have weird looking faces. So this one comes along, and she's supposed to be a very strong character. And spoiler alert for Obi-Wan Kenobi, it turns out that Darth Vader, I would say Anakin Skywalker, but he is Darth Vader at this point, whether or not he's in the suit, tries to kill her as a youngling in the Jedi Temple in a scene that you don't see in Revenge of the Sith, but it's supposed to be during that time period, and it's supposed to be a big revenge plot. The character is, I don't know, the dialogue's not great. I don't know if it's the portrayal by the actress. Anyways, doesn't really matter. Doesn't really come into it, because apparently that actress was sent horrible messages online, and we don't know what most of those horrible messages are. But I'm going to say the person who would be most aware of that would be Moses Ingram. So she's seeing all of it, or a larger percentage of it. And then the fandom out here, whether or not they're reacting positively to this show, doesn't know what all of this is. And the next thing we know, we hear that Moses Ingram is getting awful messages. And then even Ewan McGregor comes out and talks about how anyone who has this problem and is doing all of this stuff, you're not really a Star Wars fan if you're doing that. Now, I am not saying that this backlash didn't happen. It also is reminiscent of the Rose Tico situation, where there was not a lot of evidence that Rose Tico was actually receiving the backlash here. Again, I'm sure she was on some level. I think this is something where even if it's happening, you have an entire segment of the audience who is 100% unaware of what is going on, or they see these things that start to look like they're disingenuously putting diverse characters into these spaces for message reasons. And again, people are incredibly resistant to things that are disingenuous. They don't want to be sold a product. They want to experience a great story that happens to be a product. When these messages are sent at fans to say, you are racist, or sorry, to say there are racist fans and the people who have a problem with this, you're not a fan, whether or not it's intended at quote unquote all fans, I think it's perceived as being sent at all fans who have a problem with this, because we have a situation, especially in the United States, where so much language is considered racist. Things that are things that in, let's say, the 1960s, when racism was an actual problem in the United States in a much different way than it is today. Things that, like, we're talking actual things that would be chargeable offenses are considered racism. And now we have, hey, I think the fact that you don't like this character as much as you like this other character that has 40 years of history that you've been asking for a show about them, if you don't like them as much as that character, well, that means that you have some kind of systemic issue. You have some unconscious bias coming out. So those people are hearing that message and they're saying, no, you have just called me what you deem to be one of the worst names that you can call somebody, one of the worst attributes that you can call somebody. So in the end, if you're going to be called that thing, and from people who have no sense of humor whatsoever, I think it's inspiring people to say, sure, I am that thing. I'm going to make all the jokes that I can about this. So you have one audience that is completely turned off by it. And then you have the reactionary people who are saying, you know what? I'm going to make this as worse for you as possible. If you're going to call me that thing, I'm going to joke about being that thing all the time. I think that's the situation that we're in today. Vash, I've ranted on this for a very long time. Push back on me. Tell me I'm right. Tell me I'm wrong. Whatever.
No, I think there are aspects there that are absolutely profound and really hit the nail on the head here. And that's why I was referring to the delineating line before. It's one of those things where it's like, who decides who is toxic, who is not? It usually is put out generally or as a pejorative, and is taken by a large segment of the audience, and personally, in that way. So, people either lash out themselves or they just become apathetic towards your program or show. Here's the thing, they talk about these review bombs. I don't know, Jonas. I mean, I can't really see an instance, or at least think of an instance in my mind, where something was generally very, very good and that score was taken down because of review bombing, and how, like, if it wasn't for that review bombing, the score would be way higher. It usually correlates closer to, if the quality of the work isn't good, sure. Is it lower than it should be? Possibly. But usually it's pretty spot on, at least in my opinion. Maybe some people have different opinions related to that, and maybe you can point to instances in which that's not actually the case. But from my experience, these review bombings, they don't usually affect or take down really good shows, really prolific shows. They usually affect shows that have inherent problems far worse than maybe what's cited in this article here.
Right. There are very few times that I think I'm a pretty forgiving reviewer. We often joke on the Agatha and Acolyte after parties that I'm the one that's always dragging the score back up on this. I gave one episode, which I was actually mocking how entertaining the episode was, because I didn't think it was well done, but it was at least funny to me how not well done it was. I gave it a 7 because it was entertaining. Now, this Variety piece that we're referencing here, this comes just a few days after this piece from Rachel Zegler. And I would put her as, and my goodness, for the longest time, I said, get yourself a publicist. And I worry that she got herself a publicist that agreed with her and told her everything that she wanted to say, which is not what a publicist is supposed to do. This person ended up, whoever it is, and this is only a suspicion on my part, got this piece in Variety made that tries to tell everyone that, by the way, Rachel Zegler, all of the things that people are saying about her are disingenuous. They're not legitimate. It comes from people who have a problem with her playing Snow White. It even calls the people who have a problem with her casting as Snow White misogynist, which our good friend WTW Pro pointed out that who else would play Snow White except a woman? So why is that supposed to be the issue here? But this piece comes out on October 2nd. And then this Variety piece we're talking about comes out on October 3rd. And let's read this part right here. Those who did talk with Variety all agreed that the best defense is to avoid provoking fandoms in the first place. In addition to standard focus group testing, studios will assemble a specialized cluster of superfans to assess possible marketing materials for a franchise project. I'm hoping they're actual superfans and not the superfans that they gathered for Amazon's Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power stuff, where they got people who seem to know nothing about Lord of the Rings, or they were superfans of Harry Potter. One of the influencers is actually well known for her McGonagall impression. But anyways, they're very vocal, says the studio exec. They will just tell us if you do that, fans are going to retaliate. These groups have even led studios to alter projects. If it's early enough and the movie isn't finished yet, we can make those kinds of changes. Several studio insiders say they often put their talent through a social media boot camp. In some cases, when a character is intentionally challenging a franchise's status quo, studios will, with the actor's permission, take over their social media accounts entirely. When things get really bad, especially involving threats of violence, security firms will scrub talent information from the internet to protect them from doxing. Okay. There's a lot to unpack in this paragraph. Vash, I'm gonna let you go first, and then I have some reactions to this.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to unpack here. We have said before that maybe it might be best for these studios to get involved, at least with the social media platforms of their talent. And look, not to take full control of their social media entirely. That's maybe a little bit too far. But just have maybe some guidelines as to like, hey, don't antagonize the fans when talking about this. Don't reference political viewpoints that might discourage fans from actually, attending or viewing this content here. Just some simple things, just some simple bumpers. Just say, hey, look, listen, we're trying to promote a product, not discourage people from actually seeing our product, show, movie, etc. right there. And this all kind of stems back to this idea that Hollywood might just be out of step or tune with the audience, which is why they're employing things like focus groups, which is why they're castigating fans as toxic when they do actually do something that the fans actually want to see. And you have this social media thing in which actors must defend themselves. It all stems back to, do they know their audience? No.
I'm reminded of some of the comments from Zach Stentz in the making of Thor, where he said that Ken Branagh asked them very specifically, this name Mjolnir, is it going to be a big deal if we change that? And Zach Stentz and his whoever his co-writer on that film were insisted, no, you have to keep the name. It seems like some of that has been lost in the making of Marvel movies at this point, and they're going for any time that they do it. There might be some comic run, no matter how popular it is or not popular it is, they'll go ahead and use that version of a character or that telling of it, so they can say, no, it did happen in the comics, as if it's a hand wave. Now, the thing I'm seeing here is bringing in people for social media boot camp. Actors do need social media training, and that is very true. We are all too accessible online, and I would recommend anyone right now, especially if you're underage and happen to be on social media, Do not reveal personal information. Try not to go for the quote unquote hashtag relatable stuff online. That can bite you in the butt if you ever end up on the wrong side of something like this. Security firms scrubbing talent information from the internet to protect them from doxing. That's a good idea for anyone out there to have control of what information about you is online. That's good for anybody. But here's the thing that I think is actually great. If I was an actor and I was making that kind of money where somebody wants to take over my social media account entirely, yeah, go for it. Also, I would say that being offline is good for almost anyone. I think about Rachel Zegler and the comments that she has made online. She's made very clear political stances in response to advertising the trailers for movies that we're now hearing cost $500 million to make, $500 million tied up in the making of the Snow White live action remake. And she wants to stop everybody and say, by the way, this conflict over here in the Middle East, let's talk about my stance on that one, my controversial stance on that one. Now, I'm not saying I'm not trying to dictate her stances to her, but it is inappropriate when you are in charge of so many people's livelihoods, and that's a lot of livelihoods that would be dictated by the profits of that movie, perhaps for a very long time. Again, they've been marketing the original Snow White movie for nearly 100 years now because of how effective that film is. It's the whole reason the remake exists. She's playing around with a lot of people's hopes and dreams and futures here when she decides, you know what, right now I need to use this moment to essentially degrade what could be half the audience. I don't know what the division is on that particular stance, but she seems to go stance by stance and make another controversial opinion here. I think that this might be in reaction to Rachel Zegler. In fact, it takes longer than a day to put together something like this, but I don't think it's a coincidence that we see this article from Variety talking about Rachel Zegler, and then we see this article from Variety talking about social media blackouts. There's also a Hollywood Reporter article that we talked about on this channel about how is Disney bad at Star Wars, but it also goes into this. Well, there are racists, and the racists are the problem. We're seeing in the Ubisoft space. There's an analyst from Wedbush that blamed the failure of Star Wars Outlaws on incels. And the point I always bring up there is if you are marketing a video game and it doesn't market to incels, presumably one of the most attentive video game demographics out there, then you have a problem when you're spending many hundreds of $millions on a video game. So looking at all of this and seeing the fact that they have all bought nerd spaces, which I'm assuming, if such a thing exists, would be full of incels. But they want to go out here and say, oh, the incels are the problem. Guys, I don't think you understand how marketing works. So I'm going to say, taking away an actor's access to social media with their permission, just write it into the contract. That's actually a great idea. I'm all for it because there used to be a mystery to actors. And Alan Richardson that was in charge of, the lead in the Reacher series. Everyone was starting to perceive him as this big, jacked, muscular guy who was in charge of this show that was starting to be perceived as appealing to conservatives. He came out and made it very clear on social media who he agrees with politically, and it also happened to be the opposite of what his audience, his perceived audience was. So I think that hurts the marketing of a show. Now, I'm not saying that anybody needs to be silent in totality about their politics, but I think we need to be realistic that the same space where you're going to be marketing your show does not need to be the same space where you voice your disgust for your audience. I think that's just stupid. Vash, is there anything that we need to say before we wrap this up?
The only note I'll say is you mentioned Mjolnir, you mentioned creatives kind of championing the stories that they love and want to bring that to fruition in a way that not only that the audiences expect, but also as the creatives want to see those happen to be in line there. I think about Tim Burton, right? And how he wanted to cast Michael Keaton in the role of Batman, and how that was like, ooh, that's not necessarily the decision I would make. But then you see the film and it's like, oh, okay, that's why that decision was actually made. Sometimes when you have a creative that has a unique vision that wants to bring that to the screen, he can even supersede audience expectations and deliver something that maybe the audience didn't necessarily expect, but that they liked. And that was, from a creative that was more in tune with that story, how to present that story, having a unique vision to bring that to life, and doing it in a very successful way. And so a lot of these problems stem from creatives who just, who value other things like, let's say, activism, for example, and encourage creatives to go along with them in that. And that's, I think, where you get into a Rachel Zegler situation. It all kind of stems back to, are these fans themselves, these creatives, creating this work there? And if they are they creating it in such a way that audiences will find appealing? Over the last 5 years, hasn't been that case.
That's a really good point. And now that we're fully entrenched in the internet, in some ways, this stuff doesn't go away. So, we've had Dean Cain on the WDW Pro channel on occasion, and he talked about when he was cast as Superman. Dean Cain's birth name is Tanaka, and apparently there was some backlash to an Asian man being cast as Superman. I was completely unaware of that backlash until after that show was no longer on the air. So if they had come out and made a big stink and had Dean Cain come out and talk about racist backlash or anything like that while the show was still on, that would have made everyone aware of it, and made even the people who might have had a problem with it, which they shouldn't have a problem with it because he just looked like Superman to me. That would have made a lot more people aware of the situation. So I think this is a bunch of people lighting their hair on fire to decry that their hair has been lit on fire. But maybe that's my own opinion. I don't mean to moralize too much in this, but I do want to finish with the end of this article is actually pretty good. There is one other way to handle toxic fans on the internet. Stay off it. I'm not online, so I'm protected, says frequent Marvel star Elizabeth Olsen. Generally, it's a lot of positive experiences of making kids happy. I ignore the other stuff. That's great advice right there. I'm sure we've said a lot of things in this one that people are want to comment on, and that's totally fine. I would appreciate those comments because it helps in the engagement for the channel. Also, if you could like this video, if you appreciate this kind of conversation, and consider subscribing to That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.
Thanks for watching That Park Place News. For more information, consider checking out www.thatparkplace.com. And don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and send this out on your favorite social media account.